Welcome back to my Dreamworks Villains Retrospective. In this part, like the very first video I made a while back, we will once again be looking at two pieces of media for the price of one, this time being two movies, The Road to El Dorado and Chicken Run, or as per the point of this whole series, the villains of those respective films. But, to avoid jumping a little too soon, I'd like to point out how well the films did back when they were released and how people view them today. The Road to El Dorado was a box office disappointment, not even able to make back its budget, and received mixed reviews from critics, who thought the movie was a predictable adventure story. I think part of this is because it was released sometime after the wildly successful biographical film, Erin Brockovich. I myself didn't show much interest in this movie, or heck, even all of DreamWorks' 2D animated movies, when I was a kid. It wasn't until sometime after I turned 13 that my interest in it sparked, and I soon got it on DVD, I think during Christmas of 2009. For Chicken Run, it was successful both critically and financially and remains a classic to this very day, although I wasn't all that interested in the movie when I was younger and only saw bits and pieces of it, and my family even owned a VHS copy that I didn't watch a lot when I was a kid. It wouldn't be until I watched the movie on Cartoon Network that I began having a better appreciation for it. But enough about that, let's get into the retrospective. Since The Road to El Dorado came out before Chicken Run, I'll of course be talking about its villain, Tzekel-Kan, first. I couldn't find any production trivia regarding him, so in lieu of that, I've decided to talk about my personal thoughts regarding his voice actor, Armand Assante. Truth be told, Assante is an actor who has, for lack of a better term, stayed under my radar in terms of movies I've grown interested in. Looking at his history, he is well known for playing historical mobsters like Bugsy Siegel in The Marrying Man, Dominic Catano in American Gangster, and John Gotti in, well, Gotti. For me personally, I only saw one other piece of media he appeared in outside of The Road to El Dorado, which is an obscure miniseries about the life of Napoleon Bonaparte, where he plays the titular French dictator that I watched in high school with my French class. Getting back to Tzekel-Kan, to talk about his character for a minute, he is the high priest of the titular Golden City. However, it would appear that El Dorado has a different interpretation as to what counts as a religious representative, because Tzekel-Kan is not your usual priest. He's this highly eccentric and unhinged figure who appears to take delight in murder. Never mind that in traditional religious culture, such an act is seen as abominable and is therefore discouraged strongly. When he meets Tulio and Miguel and, alongside most of the El Dorado citizens, mistake them for their gods due to resembling the said deities, he projects an air of respect while also establishing some mental problems, like when he berates the El Dorado chief for simply asking the two why they came. I mean, I probably would ask the same thing because I see that as a fair question. Going off topic here for a minute, The Road to El Dorado follows a trope known as the liar story, where a protagonist lies to heck and back about something or some other before the truth explodes in their face. This kind of story has been told again and again and is the basis for many animated movies, like Pixar's A Bug's Life, Paramount's Rango, Sony Pictures' Hotel Transylvania, and even DreamWorks would dip its feet into that pool with some future movies like Shark Tale, the first How to Train Your Dragon, alongside that movie's live-action remake, and Madagascar, Europe's Most Wanted. However, The Road to El Dorado actually offers a unique way of telling this type of story, by having no one be the wiser of Tulio and Miguel's deception when they roll with the misunderstanding. Of course, I'm using no one a bit too generously here, as an El Dorado woman named Chell finds out the truth. It's implied that Chief Tannenbach sees through the two's deception but understands their good hearts, so he doesn't sell them out, and midway into the film, our villain himself finds out. I'll talk about that part a little later. Remember when I said that Tzekel-Kan is into murder? Well, it would appear that he uses his culture's religion as a way to kill people without being condemned for it, at least legally. In El Dorado culture, or in more religious cultures honestly, people honor their deities by sacrificing a living being. In El Dorado culture, one of those living beings is a fellow human. You might see where I'm going with this. Throughout most of his appearance in the movie, Tzekel-Kan shows that out of his culture's practices, sacrificing fellow human beings in El Dorado to the spirit world Zabalba is his most favorite. Some dialogue establishes that he wants to lead El Dorado into an age where human sacrifices are all the rage, called the Age of the Jaguar, and he sees Tulio and Miguel's appearance as the perfect opportunity due to mistaking them for being gods. Tulio and Miguel soon catch on how much of a bloodlust Tzekel-Kan possesses, with Tulio at one point calling him nuts. When he first attempts to sacrifice a El Dorado citizen as a tribute to Miguel and Tulio, the two soft-hearted deceivers manage to halt this by claiming that the stars aren't properly aligned for this tribute to be acceptable. A flimsy excuse since they don't want to reveal their deception to all of El Dorado, but Tzekel-Kan does nonetheless adhere to their wishes. Going off topic here again for a minute, I remember a similar scene in the 2014 Dreamworks movie, Mr. Peabody and Sherman, where Penny was about to be sacrificed and have her remains cremated and placed in a temple after she married King Tut, only to be saved by the titular dog and boy, who pretend to be the Egyptian god Anubis and claim that Ra has ordered Penny to be released. Anyway, going back to El Dorado, remember when I said that Tzekel-Kan finds out about Tulio and Miguel's lie? Well, before that happens, Tzekel-Kan arranges a sport match between Tulio and Miguel against a group of buff-looking men, hoping to use the possible defeat of the latter team as an excuse to sacrifice them in reverence for Tulio and Miguel. When the two win, mostly by cheating using an armadillo, Miguel finally puts his foot down as he makes it clear to Tzekel-Kan that they will not be accepting any human sacrifices in El Dorado. The argument between him and TK sort of reveals a layer to the villains once, as his culture's ancient scriptures state that their gods will devour whoever is deemed wicked and unrighteous. This all but states that Tzekel-Kan sees everyone in El Dorado as such when he motions that Chief Tanabak is an impure human. Of course, Miguel, as well as the audience, knows better. Getting back to how Tzekel-Kan finds out the truth, he sees a glaring Miguel bleeding on one side of his face, which was a result of Tulio accidentally striking him during the game. What happens next is sort of a turning point for Tzekel-Kan, and let me just say, this villain monologue really shows how much this guy can mean business when properly motivated.
And the city will be cleansed, even if I have to do it myself.
Before I continue, I'd like to talk about TK's use of magic. Let me just say, this is very much unlike how the priests of the Prince of Egypt did it, as it was all stage magic and illusions. Here, however, Tzekel-Kan proves to be quite the sorcerer, as he is able to do stuff like create complex illusions of spiders and even heal his hand's palm after leaving a huge wound on it. With that level of supernatural abilities, who knows what else he did before Tulio and Miguel arrived, or what else he could have done had his human sacrifice mentality went unchallenged. TK uses his powers to animate a giant jaguar statue in order to attack Tulio and Miguel. Personally, I found this to be a bit of a letdown, since sending a giant stone monster to attack the good guys feels kind of impulsive in a way. If he was trying to reveal their deception, I would have advised him to immediately call attention to Miguel's bleeding. If he was trying to kill them, he did it in such a crazy way. The score for the movie, orchestrated by Hans Zimmer and John Powell, had this scene with its own set of music, and let me tell you, it's pretty intense, and Tzekel-Kan's name is even called out, almost like the score is sort of his own personal theme. However, when he manages to corner the two above the temple, Tulio and Miguel pretend to fight on who's responsible for the whole scam, and TK looks on rather amused, as if breaking apart their friendship was victory enough for him. Of course, they end up turning their aggression toward Tzekel-Kan, who tries to kill them with the stone jaguar, but this leads him getting sent down the magical whirlpool. However, Tzekel-Kan is down but not out, as he ends up being washed ashore just far outside the hidden city and meets the ruthless Cortez. More on him later, and Tzekel-Kan, viewing Cortez as the ruthless god he's always worshipped, decides to lead him to El Dorado. This here is where Tzekel-Kan sort of enters the road to no return, because how depraved do you have to be to sell out your own nation just to feed your bloodlust? Well, in the end, it doesn't really matter, because the good guys find out about Tzekel-Kan's scheme and crash a giant boat. Tulio and Miguel ask the chief to build into some pillars holding the cave that leads to El Dorado up and create a cave-in, sacrificing the tribute of gold and materials that the two planned on taking with them in the process. As such, Tzekel-Kan is branded a liar and taken prisoner by Cortez and his men, and Tzekel-Kan sees Chell hiding amongst the rubble and can only plead desperately for the soldiers to look, obviously to no avail. It's sort of a mystery to what happens to Tzekel-Kan after this. Either he was executed by Cortez and his men, or enslaved by them, or even sold into slavery in some foreign countries, since the movie takes place in the 15th century, where slave trading is kind of all the rage. Either way, El Dorado will not have to worry about this crazy high priest anymore, and the age of the Jaguar is either stopped or will be handled differently. In terms of henchmen, Tzekel-Kan only has one that comes to mind, which is an El Dorado guard, or as he is called in the end credits, the Acolyte. Voiced by animator Duncan Marjoribanks, this guy doesn't really have much of a personality outside of serving Tzekel-Kan, and also seems to be in charge of security, as he attempted to chase Chell down for apparent theft, and at one point, when Miguel converses with him and some guards when they are attempting to punish a citizen, he states that this is the order of the gods, with a verbal tick of saying "as you have ordered." Piggybacking on this scene, if I had to find some hidden layers, it's likely he was brainwashed by the teachings of Tzekel-Kan. His voice also kind of sounds pretty deep.
But they've been cleared from the streets, my lord, so the city can be cleansed, as you ordered.
Despite being a vanilla character, and even that's debatable, some sympathy can be held for him when Tzekel-Kan sacrifices him in order to fully control the Jaguar statue. Expanding on this a little, he turns out to be the only casualty in the movie as a whole. I wish I had more to say about him, but apart from serving Tzekel-Kan and his appearance of wearing a Jaguar skin, I can't really say much else. We now come to, in my opinion, the most threatening villain in the road to El Dorado, Hernan Cortez. To start off, I feel like it's important to state that he's based on a real historical figure. Yeah, that's right. The real Hernan Cortez was a Spanish conquistador commissioned to conquer the Aztec Empire, and he ultimately succeeded. His campaign led to the fall of the Aztec civilization and involved the deaths of countless indigenous people as Spain expanded its control over new lands. That historical context gives the film's version of Cortez an immediate sense of menace and authenticity. As for production trivia, there isn't much widely documented about his creation beyond his casting. Originally, Jim Cummings, whom I've mentioned before when discussing Invasion America, was brought in to provide a placeholder voice for the character. However, the filmmakers were so impressed with his performance that they decided to keep him on as the official voice of Cortez in the final film.
Today, we sail to conquer the New World. For Spain. For glory. For gold!
Cummings also voiced a few additional minor characters in the film, including a cook that was aboard Cortez's ship. As a character, Cortez functions as kind of a shadow archetype for both Miguel and Tulio. At the start, all three share the same goal, finding El Dorado and claiming its gold. The difference is in what happens once that dream is within reach. Miguel and Tulio grow to appreciate the city and its people, ultimately deciding that their lives matter more than any treasure. Cortez, by contrast, appears to place little value on human connection at all. That's not to say being distant or antisocial is inherently bad. Many people are introverted and find fulfillment in hobbies or personal pursuits rather than social bonds. But Cortez isn't simply reserved, he's driven by conquest and legacy. He seems more interested in glorifying his own name than in the people around him, treating human life as either a commodity or something disposable. When Miguel and Tulio accidentally stow away on his ship, he imprisons them, as any commanding officer might, but quickly escalates the situation by threatening them with flogging and eventually selling them to a Cuban plantation. This scene also expands on his mindset. He boasts that he and his soldiers were carefully chosen like the disciples of Jesus Christ to conquer the New World, even claiming that God himself would approve of punishing the two con artists. It paints a picture of a man whose ruthlessness is reinforced by a deeply ingrained belief that his actions are divinely justified. I'd make a comparison to Frollo from Disney's Hunchback, but I already went over that a few times in my other retrospective videos, so let's move on. Cortez also seems to have a bit of a toxic relationship with his horse, Altivo, who later joins Miguel and Tulio on their journey. For instance, at the film's start, Cortez scolds Altivo for causing him to spill water on his armor instead of comforting him when that happened because he got spooked by some gunshots. Also, the cook I mentioned before said that his rations have been cut in half. Given Cortez's overall temperament, it's easy to imagine that his treatment of Altivo off-screen was harsher, and he even has more horses to ride. After Miguel and Tulio escape, Cortez is used sparingly for the remainder of the film. He finds the island where El Dorado lies and follows clues that Miguel and Tulio left behind, and eventually crossing paths with Tzekel-Kan when the priest emerges from a river. Before I continue, I should establish that despite coming in small doses, Cortez does command a powerful and invincible presence, as when Tulio and Miguel find out he's close to El Dorado, Miguel tells the chief that they cannot fight or defeat Cortez. Given how he has a mass army with severe firepower, Miguel may have a point here that battling Cortez and his men would be suicide. Of course, we all know how the story ends, so let's just skip ahead. Like Tzekel-Kan, Cortez sort of has his own theme from the music score. To put it into words, it sounds kind of like the opening theme to The Shining, but with an orchestra. To end things off here, even if Cortez failed to find El Dorado and has taken Tzekel-Kan prisoner, if this movie follows real-life events, there's a good chance that he might still commit genocide to other innocent Aztec civilizations. Just throwing that out there. The last guy I will be talking about in the El Dorado section is more of an antagonist than a villain, but I'd feel amiss if I didn't include him. It is the burly, bald sailor who bets the map to El Dorado at the start of the movie when Miguel and Tulio are gambling in Spain. This guy isn't named in the film, but the end credits reveal his name to be Zaragoza, voiced by Tobin Bell of Saw fame. To scrutinize him for a minute, Zaragoza ends up actually getting the ball rolling, as it was his map that's the reason Tulio and Miguel soon found El Dorado, or rather the giant empty pond outside of it. Not just that, but he also insists that Miguel and Tulio try and win the map with his own personal dice instead of the ones they have, as he suspected that they might have been playing with loaded dice. They end up succeeding, but Tulio's dice fall out and reveal that they truly were loaded, which causes a chain of events that led to Tulio and Miguel accidentally stowing away on Cortez's ship. Zaragoza is not seen again after this, although he might have been kicking himself for losing the map. Since he's more of a minor character, there's a lot about Zaragoza that goes unanswered, like how did he even get the map in the first place? Was he planning on finding El Dorado himself and needed money to sail to the New World? Did he think the map was fake and tried to scam Miguel and Tulio out of their cash, as he figured that the two were playing with fixed dice? Since he only leaves so much of an impact, we may never know. And I should note that there's a guy who looks like Zaragoza on Cortez's boat, but really isn't him due to some noticeable distinctions. I guess he was an old design for Zaragoza that the filmmakers decided to reuse for a background character. The film spawned a video game, Gold and Glory: The Road to El Dorado, and was released on 3 platforms, Windows PC, PlayStation 1 and Game Boy, with Planet Interactive developing the Game Boy version and Revolution Software making the other 2. And on a personal note, I've decided to stop mentioning the publishers of the games for here on, mostly to avoid making my videos more longer than they need to be. For the PlayStation 1 and PC version, there's no boss battles. While the villains of the movie are alluded to, it's mostly just solving puzzles around the levels. The Game Boy version meanwhile has bosses to fight. The bull that chased Miguel and Tulio around Spain in the movie is the first boss and is somehow now the size of a giant, and you try to escape him while also avoiding debris of haze that fly around when the bull runs over them. Zaragoza, or possibly the man who looks like him, is the second boss battle, and he throws knives and barrels at you. The third boss battle is with an El Dorado sports player that, like the bull, was made into giant size, and you try to hit him with balls to defeat him. The fourth boss battle is the giant stone jaguar, or as Tzekel-Kan says in this game, cougar. Finally, you face off against Cortez. For Zaragoza, the cougar, and Cortez, you throw pineapples at them, though if you run out, you end up being forced to use a sword to defeat them. Just so you guys know, there was supposed to be sequels to The Road to El Dorado, I'm guessing with other villains, but due to the financial failure of the film, they were scrapped, which is a shame because I would have liked to see what types of villains would have came from these possible sequels. And that's all my Road to El Dorado villains, so let's leave 16th century Mesoamerica and go further in time to I'm guessing the 1940s or 50s in Yorkshire, England to talk about the next film with its own set of villains. Chicken Run is the first out of 3 movies that Dreamworks co-produced with the British animation film studio, Aardman, best known for the Wallace and Gromit franchise. I'll have more to say about a certain entry in said franchise in the future. For this entry, we will be looking into the villains of Chicken Run, the main one of whom runs the chicken farm like a Nazi concentration camp. That one is Militia Tweedy, or as the film calls her formally, Mrs. Tweedy. Before I start, I'd like to remind everyone that I won't be talking about the sequel that came out over 20 years after the original because DreamWorks had no involvement in making it. Getting into her origins, or rather, what was planned for her during the production of the movie, some trivia I found online said that Mrs. Tweedy's face was supposed to remain in the shadows, sort of like Dr. Claw from Inspector Gadget. This was changed on account of how impossible it would be to keep her face hidden due to the amount of camera angles in the movie. Other ideas the filmmakers had in mind, well, I'll actually be talking about near the end of her section. Voiced by Miranda Richardson, Mrs. Tweedy, as you know, manages the chicken farm alongside her husband, Mr. Tweedy. Her responsibilities are counting how many eggs the chickens have laid before shipping them out for public consumption. Also, as shown in the scene with Edwina, if any chicken fails to meet the weekly quota, she has that chicken killed and made into the Tweedy supper. This actually isn't the case with real chicken farms as most hens are slaughtered after they reach either 18 to 24 months of age and their egg-laying abilities begin to slow down due to molting. It's unknown if Edwina has reached that age, but in the long run, it doesn't really make a difference because Mrs. T has already made the decision to take her to the slaughterhouse. This scene was done to make it more effective to sympathize with these chickens as it is heavily implied that Edwina was not the first chicken to get the axe. It also shows one of Mrs. Tweedy's main personality traits, her sadism. Just the look on her face when she sees that Edwina hasn't produced any eggs for a week really shows that slaughtering chickens who cannot produce any more eggs is the fun part of her job. The movie's soundtrack score, which was also orchestrated by John Powell, also provides this moment with a very intense score to emphasize how much of a monster this Englishwoman is. Also, like with the Road to El Dorado, Chicken Run does follow a liar-revealed formula with Rocky deceiving the hens by making them think he can fly, only the Tweedys aren't involved in this storyline. In fact, Rocky's former owner meets with them in one scene to explain his disappearance to them. So, in this case, it's the villain who understands the truth without meeting the liar. Anyway, Mrs. Tweedy also seems to carry the duty of accounting as after dinner, she begins crunching numbers to see how much cash the farm has currently made. Based on her reaction when she finishes, it's not an ideal amount. Ironically, this is what leads her to making a plan for the farm. Who would have thought that a magazine could give villains an idea? Anywho, if you've seen the movie, you'd already know that Mrs. T planned on converting the farm into a pie factory and make the chickens her primary ingredient. Though, I can't help but wonder how much the parts for that pie-making machine must have cost despite her claim that the farm is producing only minuscule profits. Despite that, Mrs. Tweedy does deliver a deliciously evil piece of dialogue that really amps her up as a threat and really shows that Richardson can play villains.
This will take Tweedy's farm out of the Dark Ages and into full-scale automated production. Militia Tweedy will be poor no longer.
I guess Mrs. Tweedy sees more value in having things done automated instead of doing things the old-fashioned way. This also sort of makes her disturbingly realistic as most business people will try to convert their place of business to having automatically produced products just to reap in large revenue. In a majority of cases, relying on automated technology doesn't really go so well. After ordering Mr. Tweedy to put the machine together, She doubles the chickens' food rations to fatten them up and be ready for the pie machine. She did this after measuring the weight of the chicken babs and decided that her weight is the right amount. I'd like to point out that with what we have seen up to here, Mrs. Tweedy is more of the brains and strategist of the farmer couple. Between what I said about her handling the finances and shipping the eggs out, all while Mr. Tweedy has more hands-on duties around the farm, like taking the eggs the chickens hatch and patrolling the farm at night. Of course, these smarts could be questioned when she doesn't pay attention to the chickens constantly trying to escape and assumes they are just dumb animals and reacts with annoyance when her husband begins seeing otherwise. Of course, this isn't because she's not smart, it's because she's too distracted by making profits. I guess irony comes in many forms. Going back to what I said about Mrs. Tweedy running the farm like a concentration camp, the pie machine seems to be an allegory for the gas chambers that many Nazis tricked the Jewish prisoners in the camp into going into. Soon, after the pie machine is put together, Ginger is chosen as a test subject, but escaped with the help of Rocky and the machine breaks down. While Mr. Tweedy spends his time repairing it, it would seem that Mrs. Tweedy spent the remainder of whatever money the Tweedy couple had on advertisement, as later in the movie, Rocky sees a billboard with Mrs. Tweedy as an innocent-looking woman who is holding a pie with a chicken in it. To reiterate, if profits were minuscule, how could she have enough money to afford advertising so much as purchasing a bunch of parts for the pie machine? All that aside though, it would seem Mrs. Tweedy finally catches on that the chickens are smarter than she gave them credit for when she notices Ginger attempting to hold up a ramp so a plane that the chickens built to escape the farm will fly in pretty soon. She holds on to the Christmas lights used for the plane. What makes this villain battle so epic is that we finally get to see Mrs. Tweedy snap, as throughout most of the film, even when she gets mad, Mrs. Tweedy does show a level of restraint. Here though, it would seem that she has finally decided to go crazy with the amount of anger and frustration she's been bottling up throughout most of the mishaps that befell her farm. Remember when I said how I would talk about Tweedy's development down the line? Well, most of that development was about her defeat. Now seems like a good as time to talk about the developments, but I should get through how Tweedy was defeated in the final film first. To those who didn't see the movie, Mrs. Tweedy gets tricked by Ginger into cutting the line and falls into the pie machine in her barn, causing it to overload and create a giant explosion, and once the dust settles, her husband gives her an "I told you so." She's about to snap at him before the door falls onto her. There are different versions of this defeat that have actually made it into production before getting cut, like how the camera was supposed to pan out after Mr. Tweedy read Mrs. Tweedy the riot act, or how she was supposed to be knocked out by a falling rock, presumably from her destroyed barn. Anyway, you'd think she would have been killed after that door fell on her, but she wasn't. But again, not going to talk about the sequel. I guess Tweedy's chicken farm, alongside her plan to make it into a pie factory, are no more, but we are far from done, so let's segue into the other villains in Chicken Run. The first of these minions I will be talking about is Mr. Willard Tweedy, or as he is formerly called, Mr. Tweedy. Voiced by the late Tony Haygarth, he is portrayed as a dopey, henpecked husband type of character. Seeing as how he manages a chicken farm with his wife, that term is almost literal. Before I go on, I feel like I should mention that not once do the Tweedys refer to each other by their birth names and instead use formalities when addressing each other. I guess the writers felt that doing otherwise might make the Tweedys be more human instead of chicken slaughtering monsters. Though to be fair, only Mrs. Tweedy's real name is stated at one point while Mr. Tweedy's is never stated. I'm not even sure if Willard is truly his real name or if it is a rumor that's generally accepted, but let's not worry about that. For Mr. Tweedy's development, he was supposed to drive a car called a Mini, which is actually a real-life British branded car, and had sentimental value to it. The car would have been destroyed after the chickens finally escaped the farm. Getting into his role in the movie, it would seem that although his wife is the main villain, Mr. Tweedy has the most personal relationship with Ginger, as he repeatedly catches her trying to escape the farm and puts her in solitary confinement in the coal bin. And when he puts together the pie machine, as I stated before, he picks Ginger to be the first test subject to finally be rid of her once and for all, but we all know how that turns out. There's a lot of stuff about Mr. Tweedy that I've already covered when talking about his wife, like how he's more of a hands-on type of farmer and how he's catching on to the chickens being more smart than he thought. To give credit where it is due, Mr. Tweedy does show he is more than a simple-minded minion cliché. Apart from being rightly suspicious of the chickens, he is able to be intimidating to them after Ginger's first failed escape attempt, showing that it's not just Ginger herself that he has a problem with, as all the chickens are on his list.
So let that be a lesson to the lot of you! No chicken escapes from Tweedy's farm!
If I had to pick at his character more, in the scene where the Tweedies get the parts for the pie machine, he at first protests to the notion that they will discontinue farming eggs, as Mr. Tweedy states that his father, grandfather and other paternal ancestors were all egg farmers, indicating that the farm was most likely handed down by every Tweedy generation. Therefore, it's likely Mrs. Tweedy married into the business, and even though the farm is legally Mr. Tweedy's, it's glaringly obvious that Mrs. Tweedy is the one calling the shots and Mr. Tweedy is too much of a coward to stand up to her. As such, when Mrs. Tweedy derides his ancestry, he does nothing to defend them, nor does he say no to putting the machine together. I guess family loyalty is fickle when it comes to women who know how to browbeat. One has to wonder what Mr. Tweedy saw in this devil woman. Judging by how he looks in this wedding photo, it's likely he was optimistic about the marriage. Boy, did he overestimate Mrs. Tweedy's supposed loving side. Soon enough, after Mr. Tweedy finds out that the chickens stole his tools to build the plane, he is then attacked by them, apprehended, and has his cap stuffed in his mouth as he gets placed under a hut. Looks like after so many times of getting put in the coal bin, Ginger finally gets one over on Mr. Tweedy. A majority of minions and features, both animated and live action, features the villain's minion or minions getting abused, and Dreamworks is no stranger to this. This can often range from funny to pitiful. For Mr. Tweedy, I'd say that he falls somewhere in the middle. You can feel sorry for him for all his wife puts him through, but he is shown to be enough of a brute on his own time, especially to Ginger, which can leave a bad taste about him, though it's implied that this abuse could stem from frustration at having to put up with his wife, though that doesn't necessarily justify him being cruel to Ginger and the chickens. Back to the movie, Mr. Tweedy, despite being tied up, manages to knock the ramp down just after the chickens are about to take off, but gets knocked out by said machine when they turn it around. Again, we all know how Mr. Tweedy's role in the story ends, with him telling his defeated and humiliated wife off for not believing him. One last thing I want to say about Mr. Tweedy is that it's unclear whether or not he intentionally pushed the giant door down on his wife when she was about to lash out at him. Personally, I don't think he has enough blind rage to do so, as when it comes to his wife, he was more willing to stand up to her on a harmless verbal level rather than get physical, and therefore, I have to give the theory that knocking the door onto his wife was accidental. At least he doesn't have to worry about dealing with his wife anymore. On to the last pair of henchmen in Chicken Run, the guard dogs who assist Mr. Tweedy in patrolling the farm and keeping the chickens behind the fence. Their names are never said, but some tie-in materials to Chicken Run give them the names Mr. Bonzo and Fido. If those are indeed their official names, it fits Aardman's sense of humor. One sounds oddly formal, while Fido is about as stereotypical a dog name as you can get. Unlike the chickens or their rat allies, Nick and Fetcher, these two don't speak in dialogue. They communicate entirely through realistic growls and barks, provided by veteran voice actor Frank Welker, who's well known for animal vocal performances. Visually, it's difficult to tell them apart since they look nearly identical. However, a tie-in book titled Chicken Run, Cutting Loose Behind the Fences at Tweedy's Farm notes that Mr. Bonzo has dark brown eyes, while Fido's are a lighter hazel. Some sources identify them as Manchester Terriers, though their design arguably resembles Doberman Pinschers more closely. In terms of characterization, they don't have much personality beyond being loyal, obedient guard dogs. They're physically formidable. Fido even chomps down on a garden gnome Ginger uses as a weapon, but they clearly fear Mrs. Tweedy when she storms outside to investigate trouble. That reaction implies she treats them with the same harshness she shows her husband. Because of their limited screen time, there isn't much deeper analysis to draw from them. For the most part, they function as reactive obstacles, responding to whatever chaos unfolds around them. They don't even play a role in stopping the chickens' escape, and after the barn is destroyed, they're seen simply licking up pie batters scattered around the place. Though, they seem to have gotten more attention in merchandising, as the heads of both dogs are used by two prop users, Stage Boy for Mr. Bonzo and Smilex for Fido, and there's a small-scale model of either of them in the possession of another prop user, Hollywood History. Like with The Road to El Dorado, there are two video game versions of the movie, one released on the Game Boy and the other released on PlayStation 1, both of which were developed by Blitz Games. In sort of a reverse situation to The Road to El Dorado, the Game Boy version has no boss battles and you just have to navigate your way through levels collecting objects in the farm section where Mr. Tweedy seems to be in charge, or lead chickens out of a steel bomb storage unit with high-tech security where Mrs. Tweedy seems to be in charge. The dogs appear in the farm sections, but as small minions to get past. For the PS1 version, you mostly just sneak past the Tweedies or the dogs to collect some stuff for the escape. If you get caught by them, you are treated to a very frightening screen of either Mrs. Tweedy, Mr. Tweedy, or even one of the dogs. If you don't like uncanny early CGI video game models, I hoped whoever played this game was good at it. This game sort of has boss fights, but in a non-traditional way, as you have to avoid the Tweedies and the dogs in 3 separate levels. For the dogs, you play as the chickens manipulating a Mrs. Tweedy dummy as you free a bunch of other chickens in many different cages around the farm and you struggle to keep balance of the chickens. For Mr. Tweedy, you play as some of the chickens working on the plane while he works on the pie machine. In this scenario, it's sort of a Simon Says kind of level where you repeat the pattern of the buttons on the controller. And for Mrs. Tweedy, you simply fly the plane while trying to avoid he throwing axes at the plane and drag her to hit various places until you get back to the chicken farm where you win the game. And that does it for this part in my retrospective. Join me next time as I talk about the villains in Dreamworks' most famous franchise ever with the Green Ogre Shrek, alongside the Puss in Boots spin-off franchise. This is definitely going to be a long video, and with how my computer will only let my videos be at least 80 minutes long, I may have to trim some analysis of these antagonists down, and I want to try and have it out by May. As the ethical bug in Puss in Boots 2 said it best.
I really have my work cut out for me on this one.